Imagine standing in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas or Missouri, surrounded by dense hardwood forests, limestone bluffs, and sparkling streams. The landscape appears timeless, peaceful, unchanged for millennia. But according to persistent reports spanning nearly 2 centuries, beneath your feet lies something that challenges our understanding of pre-Columbian North America. A network of perfectly straight tunnels, some extending for miles through solid rock, carved with a precision that seems impossible for ancient peoples working with stone tools. These are not natural caves, not the winding, irregular passages that water carves through limestone over millions of years. Witnesses describe passages with smooth walls, level floors, and laser-straight alignments that maintain consistent dimensions for extraordinary distances. Some reports speak of tunnels wide enough to drive wagons through, others of narrow corridors that extend into darkness beyond the reach of torchlight. They appear in locations scattered across the Ozark Plateau, from northern Arkansas to southern Missouri, from eastern Oklahoma to western Illinois, always described with eerily consistent features despite the independence of the reports. This is the Ozark Enigma, one of North America's most persistent yet least investigated archaeological mysteries. Unlike famous archaeological sites that attract teams of researchers and millions in funding, the Ozark tunnels exist in a strange twilight zone, widely reported in local histories and folklore, occasionally mentioned in 19th-century geological surveys, known to generations of rural residents, yet almost completely ignored by mainstream archaeology. No major university has mounted an expedition to investigate them. No comprehensive survey has attempted to locate and document the reported sites. The question of whether ancient engineered tunnels exist beneath the Ozarks remains not so much answered as unasked by institutional science. The implications, if the reports prove accurate, would be staggering. Pre-Columbian tunnel engineering on the scale described would require organizational capacity, technical knowledge, and population levels far beyond what mainstream archaeology currently attributes to the ancient peoples of the American interior. It would suggest purposes we can only speculate about: mining operations, ceremonial spaces, transportation corridors, refuges, or functions we cannot imagine because we lack the cultural context to understand them. It would mean that beneath one of America's most beautiful and seemingly primeval landscapes lies evidence of sophisticated ancient engineering that has been hiding in plain sight for generations. Before we dive deep into this mystery, if you're intrigued by unexplained historical enigmas and forgotten archaeology, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us investigate these overlooked corners of history and bring you detailed, thoughtful content. Now let's descend into the mystery of the Ozark tunnels and examine what we actually know, what we think we know, and what remains frustratingly unknown. To understand the tunnel mystery, we must first understand the Ozarks themselves, a region that defies simple categorization and holds secrets in its very bedrock. Sunrise over mountains. The Ozark Plateau, often called the Ozark Mountains, despite technically being an eroded plateau rather than true mountains, covers approximately 47,000 square miles across southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, northeastern Oklahoma, and small portions of southeastern Kansas and southern Illinois. This makes it one of the largest highland regions between the Appalachians and the Rockies, a vast uplifted dome of ancient rock that rises from the surrounding lowlands like an island of stone. The geology is complex and ancient. The exposed bedrock in many areas dates to the Ordovician period, roughly 450 million years old, consisting primarily of limestone, dolomite, and sandstone laid down when this region was covered by shallow tropical seas. Subsequent tectonic forces uplifted this seabed into a dome, and hundreds of millions of years of erosion carved it into the landscape we see today. Steep-sided valleys, high bluffs, innumerable springs and caves, and a topography so rugged that much of it remained sparsely settled well into the 20th century. Mountain this limestone and dolomite geology is crucial to the tunnel mystery because it creates natural caves prolifically. The Ozarks contain thousands of documented caves formed as slightly acidic groundwater dissolved the carbonate rock over millions of years. These natural caves are typically irregular, following fracture patterns and bedding planes, widening where water flow was strongest, narrowing to crawlways where the rock was more resistant. They meander, change elevation, branch and reconnect, and bear all the marks of natural formation. But the tunnels described in historical accounts are fundamentally different. They are straight, maintaining bearing for distances that natural caves never do. They have uniform dimensions, with walls described as smooth or even worked. They maintain level floors where natural caves would rise and fall following the rock structure. They appear in locations where the geology would not favor natural cave formation, and they sometimes connect features or cross terrain in ways that suggest intentional direction rather than random natural process. Compass. The Ozark region is also characterized by surface features that could hide tunnel entrances. Countless ravines and hollows, limestone bluffs with natural crevices and overhangs, dense forests that have reclaimed land cleared in the 19th century, and remote areas accessible only by foot or horse. A tunnel entrance obscured by rockfall, vegetation, or deliberate concealment could easily remain unknown even to people living nearby, and many reported entrances are described as being discovered accidentally by hunters, farmers, or miners before being lost again. Evergreen tree water is everywhere in the Ozarks. Springs emerge from hillsides, creeks flow through every valley, and underground drainage is extensive. Caves often contain streams or are completely flooded. This hydrology means that any ancient tunnel system would have to deal with water, either by design or by fortunate placement in drained formations. Several reports describe tunnels with water flowing through them or passages accessible only by wading or boating, suggesting interaction between artificial construction and natural hydrology. Droplet long before European contact, the Ozarks were home to human populations whose sophistication and capabilities we are only beginning to understand. The archaeological record reveals at least 12,000 years of continuous human presence, with multiple cultural traditions rising, flourishing, and fading across the millennia. Classical, The earliest confirmed inhabitants were Paleo-Indian peoples who arrived at the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 to 10,000 years ago. These were mobile hunter-gatherers who pursued now extinct megafauna, including mammoths, mastodons, and giant ground sloths. Archaeological sites from this period are rare in the Ozarks, but have been documented, including distinctive Clovis and Dalton projectile points that establish human presence in the early Holocene. These peoples would have known the landscape intimately, including any natural caves that provided shelter or resources. The Archaic period, spanning roughly 10,000 to 3,000 years ago, saw fundamental changes in Ozark cultures. As the climate warmed and megafauna went extinct, peoples adapted to hunting smaller game, gathering intensively from the rich Ozark forests and increasingly exploiting the region's abundant aquatic resources. Population densities increased, seasonal settlements became larger and more permanent, and trade networks developed that connected the Ozarks to regions hundreds of miles distant. Bow and arrow evidence of archaic occupation is substantial throughout the Ozarks. Bluff shelters, the overhanging limestone ledges that characterize Ozark topography, contain deep archaeological deposits with stratified layers representing thousands of years of repeated use. These shelters provided natural protection from weather and were clearly valued residential sites. But they also demonstrate that Ozark peoples knew their landscape's geology intimately and exploited natural rock formations for their benefit. The question is whether this knowledge extended to modifying those formations or excavating new ones. Camping the woodland period, approximately 3,000 to 1,000 years ago, brought further cultural complexity. Pottery appears in the archaeological record. Bow and arrow technology replaced the atlatl. Agriculture began with cultivation of native plants like sunflower, goosefoot, and eventually maize. Most significantly for our purposes, this period saw the construction of earthen mounds and other monumental architecture across much of eastern North America, including the Ozark Periphery. Amphora. The Mississippian period, roughly 1,000 to 500 years ago, witnessed the florescence of the most complex pre-Columbian societies in the eastern United States. Great ceremonial centers arose, most famously Cahokia near present-day St. Louis, which at its peak, around 1100 CE, housed perhaps 20,000 people and featured massive earthen pyramids, astronomical observatories, and evidence of far-flung trade networks. While the Ozark interior did not host major Mississippian centers, it was certainly integrated into these networks as a source of raw materials and a corridor for trade and communication. Ear of corn. What's crucial for the tunnel mystery is recognizing that these pre-Columbian peoples were not primitive savages living in harmony with nature in some romanticized sense. They were sophisticated societies capable of monumental construction, complex engineering, intensive resource extraction, and large-scale landscape modification. The earthen mounds of the Mississippian culture represent millions of person-hours of coordinated labor. The agricultural systems supported substantial populations. The trade networks moved copper from Lake Superior, shells from the Gulf Coast, obsidian from the Rockies, and mica from the Appalachians across thousands of miles. Hammer. If these societies could construct 100-foot-tall earthen pyramids, could they not also excavate tunnels? If they could quarry, transport, and precisely place massive stones in ceremonial centers, could they not work limestone with sufficient skill to create passages? The capabilities demonstrated in other contexts suggest that tunnel engineering would not be beyond their technical reach, only beyond what we have previously imagined them doing in the Ozarks specifically. One of the most overlooked aspects of pre-Columbian North American archaeology is the extensive evidence for mining and underground resource extraction. Because mainstream narratives have long portrayed indigenous peoples as living lightly on the land, taking only what nature provided on the surface, the reality of sophisticated pre-Columbian mining operations comes as a surprise to many. Yet the evidence is overwhelming and directly relevant to the Ozark Tunnel question. Pick. The most extensively documented pre-Columbian mining operations are the copper mines of Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula and Isle Royale. Here, indigenous peoples mined native copper that occurs in pure metallic form within basalt formations, for at least 7,000 years and possibly longer. Archaeological investigations have documented thousands of mining pits, some excavated to depths of 20 feet or more into solid rock. The scale of these operations was extraordinary. Estimates suggest that ancient miners extracted between 500,000 and 1.5 billion pounds of copper from the Lake Superior region. They followed copper veins underground, removing overburden, excavating shafts and galleries, and employing techniques including fire setting, where rock was heated with fire, then rapidly cooled with water to induce fracturing. The copper was then cold-worked into tools, weapons, and ornamental objects that have been found in archaeological sites throughout eastern North America. These were not casual, small-scale operations. They required organized labor, technical knowledge passed down across generations, understanding of geology to follow veins, and infrastructure to support miners working underground. In other words, precisely the capabilities that would be needed to excavate tunnels. Construction worker. The Ozarks themselves have documented evidence of pre-Columbian mining, though on a smaller and less systematically studied scale than the Lake Superior copper mines. The region contains deposits of lead, zinc, barite, and other minerals that were known and exploited by indigenous peoples. Early European settlers frequently reported finding ancient diggings, stone tools at mining sites, and evidence of prehistoric extraction. Particularly relevant are reports of prehistoric lead mining. Lead, or galena, was valued by indigenous peoples for pigment, for ceremonial purposes, and possibly for trade. Galena deposits in the Ozarks, particularly in areas of southeast Missouri and north-central Arkansas, show evidence of ancient extraction. While most documented examples appear to be surface or shallow pit mining, several 19th-century accounts describe encountering what seem to be ancient underground workings while excavating new mines. Hammer. The challenge is that later mining operations typically destroyed or obscured earlier workings. When 19th-century miners discovered productive ore deposits, they extracted them intensively with no thought to preserving evidence of earlier exploitation. Stone tools found in old diggings were curiosities, mentioned in passing in local histories, but rarely preserved or systematically studied. The result is that we have fragmentary evidence of pre-Columbian mining in the Ozarks, but lack comprehensive documentation of its extent, techniques, or chronology. Scroll. Another relevant example comes from the flint quarries and mines documented across North America. High-quality flint or chert, essential for tool-making, was quarried intensively at certain locations. Some of these quarrying operations involved underground excavation, following seams of quality stone into hillsides, or even creating shaft and gallery systems. The Flint Ridge site in Ohio, for example, shows evidence of extensive prehistoric quarrying, including underground workings. The point is this: we know with certainty that pre-Columbian peoples in North America engaged in underground mining, that they could and did excavate into bedrock, that they possessed techniques for working stone and following desired materials underground, and that they were capable of sustained, organized extraction operations. The technical capability for tunnel excavation demonstrably existed. The question is not whether ancient peoples could have created tunnels, but whether they did so in the Ozarks, and if so, for what purposes? Person shrugging. The written documentation of mysterious tunnels in the Ozarks begins almost as soon as literate Europeans settled the region in the early 19th century. These accounts are frustratingly fragmentary, scattered across county histories, personal memoirs, newspaper articles, and the oral traditions of settler families, but their very multiplicity and independence is significant. Open Book, one of the earliest documented accounts, comes from Arkansas territorial records from the 1820s. A surveyor working in what is now Stone County, Arkansas, noted in his field journal finding an opening in a limestone bluff that led to a passage described as extending into the mountain with surprising regularity. The account, preserved in the Arkansas State Archives, describes walls that appeared smooth and a floor that was remarkably level. Maintained for the distance the surveyor dared to explore by torchlight, approximately 200 feet before he retreated due to poor air quality. Candle. The surveyor, a trained professional accustomed to natural caves, explicitly noted that the passage seemed different from other caves he had encountered in the region. He speculated it might be an old mine working, though he found no evidence of ore extraction. The location was noted with compass bearings and landmarks, but subsequent attempts to relocate the entrance using the surveyor's notes have been unsuccessful, likely due to changes in the landscape over nearly 2 centuries. Compass. County histories from the mid to late 19th century contain numerous references to unusual caves or tunnels discovered by settlers. The 1889 History of Greene County, Missouri, describes the experience of a farmer who, while digging a well in the 1850s, broke through into a void space that proved to be a tunnel extending in both directions from the well shaft. The tunnel was described as approximately 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, with a floor of smooth rock and walls that showed marks suggesting human working. The farmer, fearing the tunnel might be unstable or might be used by outlaws or fugitives, filled in the well shaft and reportedly never spoke of the discovery except to close family. Tractor. An 1876 account from Newton County, Arkansas, describes a tunnel discovered by boys exploring along a creek bed. They found an opening concealed behind fallen rocks and explored a passage that they claimed extended in a straight line for several hundred yards before becoming blocked by collapse. The boys reported the walls had a peculiar smoothness, and the passage maintained its dimensions without the variation typical of natural caves. When adults attempted to relocate the entrance several days later, they could not find it, leading to speculation that the boys had fabricated the story, though they insisted on its truth for the rest of their lives. Particularly intriguing are accounts from the lead mining regions of Missouri. Multiple 19th century sources describe miners breaking into pre-existing passages while excavating new works. An 1882 report from Washington County, Missouri, preserved in mining company records, describes miners who broke through a rock face and discovered a horizontal passage behind it, extending beyond the reach of their lamps. With a floor covered in several inches of fine sediment and walls that appeared to have been worked, the miners explored for approximately 300 feet before turning back due to poor air. The passage was subsequently destroyed by continued mining operations, and no detailed documentation was preserved. These early accounts share certain common features. The tunnels are described as unusually straight, maintaining bearing for greater distances than natural caves typically do. They have consistent dimensions, described variously as tall enough to walk upright or requiring stooping, but maintaining those dimensions rather than the constant variation of natural passages. The walls are frequently described as smooth or showing evidence of working. The floors are level or nearly so. And crucially, the discoverers typically express surprise or puzzlement, noting that the passages seem different from the natural caves they are familiar with. Hushed-faced skeptics might dismiss these accounts as misidentifications of natural caves by people unfamiliar with cave geology, but many of the witnesses were not naive observers. They included surveyors, miners, and settlers who lived their entire lives in the Ozarks and knew natural caves intimately. Their surprise and their explicit statements that these passages seemed different from ordinary caves deserve consideration rather than dismissal. Face with raised eyebrow. When we map the historical accounts of tunnel discoveries, a geographic pattern emerges that is suggestive, if not conclusive. The reports cluster in certain regions rather than being randomly distributed across the Ozarks, and these clusters correlate with specific geological and topographic features. World. The northern Arkansas cluster includes reports from Stone, Searcy, Van Buren, Cleburne, and Independence counties. This region is characterized by the deeply dissected plateau of the Boston Mountains and the Springfield Plateau, with extensive limestone formations, high bluffs, and rugged terrain. The area was sparsely settled until the mid-19th century and remains relatively remote today, with large areas of Ozark National Forest covering land that has never been intensively developed. Evergreen tree. The southern Missouri cluster centers on the area from Taney and Ozark counties westward through Christian and Stone counties, the same region that today draws millions of tourists to Branson and the Table Rock Lake area. Historical accounts from this region describe tunnel discoveries in bluff faces, in cave systems, and occasionally found during construction or agricultural activities. The geology here is similar to northern Arkansas, dominated by Mississippian limestones and dolomites with extensive natural cave development. National. A third cluster appears in southeastern Missouri, in the Old Lead Mining District, including Washington, St. Francois, and Madison counties. Here, the reports often come from mining contexts, with tunnels discovered during extraction operations or found when prospecting for ore. This region sits on the eastern flank of the Ozark Dome, where Precambrian igneous rocks are overlain by Paleozoic sedimentary formations, including the limestones that host lead deposits. Mountain. Smaller clusters and isolated reports come from eastern Oklahoma in the Ozark foothills, from the Illinois Ozark region near the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, and from scattered locations throughout the Arkansas River Valley where it cuts through the Ozark Dome. Snow. What's significant is that these clusters do not correlate obviously with population density or historical documentation intensity. Some heavily settled and well-documented areas yield few tunnel reports, while remote regions with sparse historical records produce multiple accounts. The pattern suggests the reports reflect something about the actual distribution of tunnels, if they exist, rather than simply where people looked for them or wrote about them. The clusters do, however, correlate with certain geological features. They appear preferentially in areas with thick limestone formations conducive to both natural cave development and potential tunnel excavation. They cluster in regions with high topographic relief, where tunnel routes could cross beneath ridges or connect valleys separated by surface barriers. And they appear in areas that show evidence of intensive pre-Columbian occupation and resource use. BRICS modern researchers attempting to investigate the tunnel mystery have focused efforts on these cluster regions, using historical accounts to guide site selection. The challenge is that 19th century location descriptions are often imprecise by modern standards. 2 miles up Buffalo Creek from the Smith settlement is useless if we don't know exactly where the Smith settlement was, or if Buffalo Creek's course has changed due to flooding or erosion. Landmarks mentioned in old accounts, trees or rock formations, no longer exist or cannot be definitively identified. Deciduous tree. Nevertheless, the geographic clustering suggests that a systematic survey focusing on these regions, using modern remote sensing technologies, historical records, and consultation with longtime local residents, could potentially locate at least some of the reported tunnels if they exist and remain accessible. That such a survey has never been mounted by any major institution is one of the mysteries surrounding the mystery. Magnifying glass tilted left. Among the numerous historical accounts of Ozark tunnels, few are as detailed and well documented as the story of what became known locally as the Cushman Tunnel, discovered in Independence County, Arkansas, in the early 1900s. This case provides our most comprehensive look at what witnesses actually reported finding and why mainstream archaeology has struggled to engage with such reports. Flashlight, the account comes from multiple independent sources compiled by a local historian in the 1930s and preserved in the Independence County Historical Society archives. According to these records, in approximately 1903, two brothers named William and George Tackett were hunting along the White River near what is now the town of Cushman. They were following a wounded deer that had retreated into heavy brush along a limestone bluff face when they discovered an opening concealed behind a rockfall and thick vegetation. Deer. Curious, the brothers cleared enough of the debris to enter and found themselves in a passage that immediately struck them as unusual. William Tackett's later written account, recorded in 1928, when he was in his 60s, describes the passage as approximately 7 feet high and 5 feet wide. With walls that were remarkably smooth and vertical, not the irregular surfaces typical of natural caves they had explored throughout their lives in the Ozarks. Memo: the brothers explored the passage using torches made from pine knots. According to their account, the passage extended in a straight line, bearing slightly north of west, for a distance they estimated at over 500 yards before they encountered a collapse that completely blocked further progress. Throughout this distance, the passage maintained consistent dimensions with only minor variation. The floor was level, with a slight downward grade in the direction they were traveling. They noted no side passages, no formations typical of limestone caves such as stalactites or flowstone, and an unusual absence of the cave-adapted wildlife, bats and salamanders, that they expected to find. Bat. Most significantly, the Tackett brothers reported seeing marks on the walls that appeared to be tool marks, parallel grooves running horizontally at regular intervals. They described these marks as too regular and uniform to be natural weathering or random scratching. They also noted that in several places, the walls and ceiling appeared to show a different texture, as if the rock had been worked or finished in some way that differed from the surrounding natural stone. Hammer. The brothers returned to the site multiple times over the following months, bringing neighbors and family members to witness the tunnel. Several of these witnesses provided their own accounts, largely corroborating the Tackett description. One witness, a stonemason named James Crawford, examined the walls specifically and stated in a later interview that the smoothness and verticality of the walls would have required deliberate working, that natural erosion could not produce such surfaces in the type of limestone present at the site. Bricks. Excitement about the discovery led to proposals to clear the collapse and explore further, but these plans were never realized. The area was remote, requiring a difficult trek from the nearest settlement. The landowner was uninterested in allowing excavation on his property. And by 1905, the entrance had been obscured again by a rockfall, possibly triggered by heavy spring flooding that year. Later attempts to relocate the entrance, including several organized searches in the 1920s and 1930s, were unsuccessful. The Cushman Tunnel account is significant for several reasons. First, it comes from multiple independent witnesses who were experienced outdoorsmen familiar with natural caves. Their surprise and explicit statements that this passage seemed different from natural formations cannot be easily dismissed as naive misidentification. Second, the account includes specific details about dimensions, bearing, features, and extent that are consistent with other tunnel reports from the region. Third, it was documented relatively soon after the discovery, before decades of retelling could embellish or distort the account. Clipboard. Yet mainstream archaeology has never investigated the Cushman Tunnel. The account appears in local histories and folklore collections, but not in peer-reviewed archaeological literature. No professional archaeologist has attempted to relocate the entrance using modern search techniques. The story exists in that twilight zone between folklore and historical documentation, too detailed to dismiss, but too unverified to accept. First quarter moon. A different type of evidence emerges from Stone County, Missouri, where a well-known show cave called Talking Rocks Cave, formerly known as Fairy Cave, contains features that have puzzled speleologists since its commercial development in the 1920s. While not a secret tunnel in the sense of the Cushman account, this cave contains passages that cave geologists have struggled to explain through natural formation processes alone. Bat. Talking Rocks Cave is a large limestone cave system that has been commercially operated as a tourist attraction for nearly a century. The main chambers and passages are clearly natural, formed by the dissolution of limestone by groundwater over millions of years. They display all the typical features of Ozark caves: irregular shapes following bedding planes and fractures, abundant speleothems including stalactites and stalagmites, evidence of stream formation, and the sinuous paths characteristic of natural development. But one section of the cave, known to the operators as the back passage, has characteristics that have raised questions since its discovery during the cave's initial exploration in the 1920s. This passage, which extends approximately 400 feet from the main cave system, is notably straight, maintaining a bearing within a few degrees throughout its length. The walls are smoother than the natural passages, with fewer protrusions and a more vertical orientation. The ceiling height remains remarkably constant at approximately 6 to 7 feet, and the width varies only between 4 and 5 feet along its entire length. Compass. Most puzzling to geologists who have examined the passage is that it does not follow the typical structural controls that govern natural cave formation. In limestone caves, passages normally form along fractures, joints, or bedding planes, where water can flow preferentially and dissolve the rock. But the back passage crosses multiple such features at various angles without deviation, maintaining its straight bearing regardless of the rock structure. A geological survey conducted in 1967 by researchers from the University of Missouri noted these anomalies and concluded that the passage's formation was difficult to explain through conventional cave development processes. The report, published in a regional speleological journal, suggested that the passage might represent an unusual type of natural development not well understood, or alternatively, that it might have been modified or enlarged by humans at some point, possibly in the pre-Columbian era. The researchers recommended further study, but noted that any evidence of human modification would likely have been obscured by subsequent natural processes and by the modifications made when the cave was developed for tourism. Microscope. The cave's operators and guides have long been aware of the back passage's unusual characteristics. In the 1930s and 1940s, the cave's promotional materials actually highlighted the passage as a possible ancient Indian tunnel, though this marketing angle was later abandoned in favor of emphasizing the cave's natural beauty. Longtime guides, interviewed in the 1990s, recalled that earlier generation guides had stories about the passage being an old mine working or an escape tunnel, though the source of these stories was unclear. Ticket. What makes the Talking Rocks case valuable is that it represents a potentially accessible site where the question of natural versus human formation could be investigated using modern archaeological and geological techniques. The passage still exists, is accessible, and could be studied using high-resolution 3D scanning, detailed geological mapping, analysis of tool marks if present, and even potentially finding datable materials if any human modification occurred. Yet no such study has been undertaken. The passage remains an anomaly noted in passing, but never seriously investigated. While the 19th century accounts form the historical foundation of the Ozark Tunnel mystery, reports did not cease with the coming of the 20th century. Throughout the 1900s, occasional accounts continued to surface, though the context and character of these reports changed with the times. Calendar in the 1930s and 1940s, several reports emerged in the context of works progress administration projects that put unemployed men to work on infrastructure projects during the Great Depression. Multiple WPA workers engaged in road building, bridge construction, and park development across the Ozarks reported encounters with mysterious passages. Construction worker, a particularly detailed account, comes from a WPA road crew working in Madison County, Arkansas, in 1936. The crew was cutting through a hillside to establish a new road grade when they broke through into a void space. Investigation revealed a passage extending into the hillside, described in the crew foreman's report as approximately 8 feet wide and high enough to stand upright, extending beyond the range of their flashlights before apparently turning or becoming blocked. Construction. The foreman's report, preserved in National Archives records of WPA projects, notes that the passage walls appeared smooth and the floor was level with accumulated sediment. The crew explored approximately 100 feet before retreating due to concerns about air quality and structural stability. The report was forwarded to the WPA regional office with a recommendation that an engineer examine the passage to determine if it posed a risk to the road construction. Page facing up the response from the regional office, also preserved in the archives, instructed the crew to fill the opening and continue construction, noting that investigation of the passage was beyond the scope of their project, and that any cave or tunnel in the area would not affect road stability if properly filled. The crew followed these instructions, and the passage, whatever it was buried beneath the new road grade where it remains today, somewhere under Highway 23 in Madison County. Motorway during the 1950s and 1960s, as recreational caving became increasingly popular, spelunkers began systematically exploring and mapping Ozark caves. Several of these explorers reported finding passages that seemed anomalous, though most of these reports exist only in informal caving club newsletters and trip reports rather than official publications. Person climbing. One such report, from a 1962 exploration of a cave system in Newton County, Arkansas, describes a passage that the exploration team designated as showing possible signs of human modification. The passage was notable for maintaining a consistent compass bearing over approximately 300 feet, for having a floor that appeared to have been leveled or smoothed, and for lacking the typical breakdown and irregularity of natural cave passages in that system. The team noted these observations in their trip report and recommended that experienced archaeologists examine the passage. This recommendation was apparently never followed up. The cave is on private property, the owner has since died, and subsequent cavers have been unable to gain access to verify the original team's observations. The 1962 trip report remains the only documentation of this potentially significant passage, locked with key. The late 20th century brought a different type of report: accidental discoveries during construction and development. As the Ozarks developed economically with the growth of tourism, retirement communities, and recreational lake construction, earth-moving equipment occasionally broke into underground voids. Building. In 1978, construction of a shopping center in Springfield, Missouri, required excavation of a hillside. The excavation unexpectedly revealed an opening that led to a passage extending into the hill. According to newspaper accounts from the time, the construction supervisor who examined the passage described it as unusually regular in shape and orientation. The discovery caused a brief halt in construction while the developer consulted with geologists about potential sinkhole risks. The geologists' report, referenced in subsequent news coverage, concluded that the passage did not pose a structural risk to the planned construction and that it was likely a natural cave feature, though the report also noted some unusual characteristics that were difficult to explain. Construction resumed, and the passage was filled with concrete as part of the shopping center's foundation. Today, a grocery store occupies the site, and the passage, if it was significant, is entombed beneath tons of concrete and commercial development. Convenience store. Given the persistence of tunnel reports across nearly 2 centuries, the question arises: why has mainstream archaeology not investigated these claims? The answer reveals much about the institutional structures, methodological assumptions, and practical constraints that govern academic archaeology. Graduation cap. The first barrier is evidentiary. Archaeology, as a professional discipline, privileges certain types of evidence: artifacts in stratified deposits, structures that can be mapped and analyzed, materials that can be dated and chemically characterized. Oral accounts and historical reports, while valuable as supplementary sources, are not considered sufficient evidence to justify major research investments without physical corroboration. Books, the tunnel reports, for the most part, lack this physical corroboration. They are accounts of discoveries that cannot be replicated because the sites have been lost, destroyed, or remain inaccessible on private property. An archaeologist reading these accounts faces a dilemma. The claims are potentially significant, but how does one investigate a tunnel that cannot be located? Without a specific site to excavate or survey, traditional archaeological methodology cannot be applied. Person shrugging second, there is the problem of theoretical framework. Mainstream North American archaeology has developed comprehensive models of pre-Columbian cultures in the Mississippi Valley and eastern woodlands regions. These models are based on decades of excavation and analysis at thousands of sites. They include detailed understanding of subsistence practices, social organization, settlement patterns, trade networks, and technological capabilities. Amphora within these established models, there is no clear place for extensive tunnel engineering. The pre-Columbian cultures of the eastern woodlands built earthen mounds, some of enormous size and complexity. They created sophisticated agricultural systems. They worked stone, wood, bone, and copper with considerable skill. But nowhere in the well-studied archaeological record of the region is there unambiguous evidence of tunnel excavation as a significant cultural practice. This creates a cognitive barrier. When archaeologists encounter claims that don't fit established models, the default assumption is that the claims are probably mistaken rather than that the models are incomplete. A report of a mysterious tunnel is more likely to be interpreted as a misidentified natural cave, a misremembered account, or even a hoax than as evidence that requires revision of fundamental understanding. This is not unreasonable skepticism. It is how science normally operates, but it can create blindness to genuine anomalies. See No Evil Monkey third, there are practical and political barriers. Archaeological research is expensive, requiring funding for personnel, equipment, travel, analysis, and publication. Funding comes primarily from government agencies and private foundations, which evaluate proposals based on expected scientific return. A proposal to search for tunnels that may not exist, based on historical accounts that may be unreliable in locations that cannot be precisely specified, faces an uphill battle against proposals to excavate known sites that will certainly yield analyzable data. Money bag. Even if funding could be secured, site access poses challenges. Much of the Ozarks is privately owned, and property owners may be unwilling to allow archaeological investigation, especially if it might lead to restrictions on land use or development. Federal and state lands, while potentially more accessible, require permits and environmental impact assessments for any significant excavation or disturbance. The bureaucratic hurdles can be daunting for a project whose scientific payoff is uncertain. Construction, finally, there is a career dimension. Academic archaeology, like all academic fields, rewards publication in peer-reviewed journals, books from university presses, and recognition from professional peers. A young archaeologist pursuing tenure has strong incentives to work on projects that will produce publishable results within reasonable time frames. Investigating tunnel claims that might prove baseless could consume years without yielding publishable data, a career risk few junior scholars can afford. Senior archaeologists with established reputations have more freedom, but also more demands on their time and institutional obligations. The result is that the tunnel question falls through the cracks, too risky for junior scholars, too peripheral for senior scholars, too uncertain for funders, and too far outside established frameworks to attract serious institutional attention. Hole. One source of knowledge that has been almost entirely neglected in discussions of the Ozark tunnels is the oral traditions of the Native American peoples who inhabited and continue to maintain cultural connections to the region. This neglect reflects the broader historical pattern of dismissing indigenous knowledge, but it also represents a missed opportunity to understand the tunnels, if they exist, within appropriate cultural contexts. The Ozarks region was historically inhabited or used by multiple indigenous nations, including the Osage, Quapaw, Caddo, and later, the Cherokee, who were forcibly relocated to Indian Territory to the west. Each of these peoples maintained oral traditions about the landscape, including traditions about caves, springs, and underground places that held spiritual or practical significance. Unfortunately, systematic documentation of these traditions, specifically regarding artificial or modified underground passages, is sparse. The ethnographic work done with Ozark indigenous communities in the 19th and early 20th centuries typically focused on other aspects of culture, and questions about tunnels were rarely, if ever, asked in ways that might have elicited relevant traditional knowledge. Open book. However, scattered references do exist in ethnographic literature that may be relevant. A 1920s ethnographic study of the Osage, conducted by Francis La Flèche, includes passing references to traditional knowledge about caves that served as ceremonial spaces. One brief mention describes certain caves as being considered particularly powerful because they had been worked or modified by ancestors to create appropriate spaces for specific ceremonies. The account does not provide locations or details about the nature of the modifications. Candle. Similarly, interviews with Cherokee elders conducted in the 1930s as part of the Federal Writers Project include stories about the time before removal, when certain caves in the Arkansas Ozarks were known to tribal members as special places. One account from an elder born in 1848, whose grandparents had made the forced march of the Trail of Tears, mentions family stories about passages beneath the hills that the old people knew about, passages that went deep and far and were associated with powerful spirits or beings. Old man. These references are frustratingly vague and cannot be taken as clear evidence for artificial tunnels. They could refer to natural caves that held cultural significance, to spiritual concepts rather than physical places, or to traditions that have become garbled through disrupted transmission. But they at least suggest that Ozark indigenous peoples had sophisticated knowledge about underground spaces and may have had traditions about certain passages being the result of ancient work. Glowing star, a different type of indigenous perspective, comes from contemporary Native American communities. When consulted about the tunnel question, representatives from the Osage Nation and the Cherokee Nation have indicated that their communities do maintain knowledge about special places in the Ozarks, including some underground sites, but that much of this knowledge is considered culturally sensitive and not appropriate to share with outsiders or to publicize. Zipper mouth face. This creates an ethical and practical dilemma for investigation. If indigenous communities possess traditional knowledge about the tunnels, that knowledge could be invaluable for locating sites and understanding their cultural context. But indigenous communities have legitimate reasons for protecting sacred knowledge from outsiders, especially given the long history of exploitation and desecration of Native American cultural sites. Pensive face. Any responsible investigation of the Ozark tunnels would need to be conducted in genuine partnership with indigenous communities, respecting their authority over cultural knowledge and sacred sites, ensuring that any discoveries benefit those communities rather than just extracting knowledge for academic purposes. Such partnerships are possible. Collaborative archaeology has developed models for respectful research, but they require institutional commitment and resources that have not been devoted to the tunnel question. Handshake. Assuming for the sake of argument that some of the tunnel reports are accurate, that there do exist artificial or significantly modified underground passages beneath the Ozarks, how might we explain their existence? Several theoretical frameworks have been proposed, each with different implications for understanding pre-Columbian cultures and capabilities. The most straightforward explanation is that the tunnels are ancient mining works, created by pre-Columbian peoples to extract mineral resources. We know that pre-Columbian mining occurred in North America. The Lake Superior copper mines prove that beyond doubt. We know the Ozarks contain mineral deposits including lead, zinc, and other valuable materials. And we know that some tunnel reports come from mining regions where later operations may have intersected earlier workings. Pick. Under this hypothesis, pre-Columbian peoples identified valuable mineral deposits in the Ozarks and excavated tunnels to follow ore veins or to access minerals more efficiently than surface extraction would allow. Over centuries or millennia, these mining tunnels could have extended for considerable distances. After mining ceased, the entrances were abandoned or deliberately sealed, and the tunnels were gradually forgotten, surviving only in fragmentary oral traditions and accidental rediscoveries. The strength of this hypothesis is that it requires no capabilities beyond what we know pre-Columbian peoples possessed. Mining technology existed, motivation existed in the form of valuable materials, and the resulting tunnels would naturally be relatively straight as they followed ore veins. The weakness is that we have limited evidence for underground mining in the Ozarks. Specifically, most documented pre-Columbian mineral extraction in the region appears to have been surface or shallow pit mining rather than tunnel excavation. A more speculative explanation is that the tunnels served as transportation corridors, protected routes that allowed travel through difficult terrain or hostile territory. The Ozarks present significant obstacles to surface travel: steep slopes, dense vegetation, numerous stream crossings, and terrain that becomes treacherous in bad weather. Underground passages that crossed beneath ridges or connected valleys could have provided valuable shortcuts. This hypothesis gains some support from the reported straightness of the tunnels. A transportation corridor would ideally be straight, minimizing distance between points. It would need consistent dimensions to allow passage of people and possibly goods, and it would benefit from concealed entrances to protect the route from enemies or rivals. The challenge is the enormous labor investment such tunnels would require. A transportation tunnel extending even a quarter-mile through solid rock would represent thousands of person-hours of labor using stone tools. Without compelling need, such investment seems unlikely. Proponents of this hypothesis suggest that the tunnels might have served trade networks connecting resource extraction sites to distant markets, that the labor investment would be justified if the routes facilitated movement of valuable goods over long periods. Package. A third framework interprets the tunnels as primarily ceremonial or spiritual in function. Caves and underground spaces hold spiritual significance in many cultures worldwide, often seen as entrances to the underworld, as liminal spaces between the ordinary and spiritual realms, or as sites of power where humans can connect with supernatural forces. Folded hands pre-Columbian cultures in eastern North America certainly used caves ceremonially. Archaeological evidence from various sites shows that certain caves received deposits of artifacts, unusual concentrations of exotic materials, and evidence of fires or other ritual activities. If the Ozark tunnels exist, they may represent an extension of this practice, the deliberate creation or modification of underground spaces to serve ceremonial functions. Under this hypothesis, the tunnel's straightness and regular dimensions might reflect cosmological symbolism rather than practical engineering. The labor investment would be justified not by economic return, but by spiritual significance. The tunnels might have been created by specific religious societies, maintained in secrecy, and used for initiation rites, vision quests, or ceremonies that required the special environment of deep underground spaces. Sparkles. This framework has the advantage of explaining why the tunnels would be deliberately concealed and why knowledge of them might be restricted, explaining why they could be forgotten after cultural disruption. The disadvantage is that it is almost impossible to test archaeologically without finding the tunnels and discovering unambiguous evidence of ceremonial use. A more conservative explanation suggests that the tunnels are primarily natural caves that have been modified, enlarged, or improved by human activity. Under this hypothesis, pre-Columbian peoples discovered natural passages that were useful for various purposes: shelter, storage, ceremonial use, or travel. They then modified these passages to make them more suitable, smoothing walls, leveling floors, clearing obstructions, perhaps connecting nearby caves into more extensive networks. Hammer. This explanation requires less dramatic engineering than the creation of entirely artificial tunnels. Working with existing voids and simply improving them is much less labor-intensive than excavating through solid rock. It could explain why the passages show both natural and artificial characteristics, why they appear in regions with extensive natural cave development, and why geological investigations sometimes find them puzzling but not completely inexplicable. Jigsaw. The challenge for this hypothesis is explaining the most dramatic claims in the historical record. passages extending for hundreds of yards in perfectly straight lines, maintaining consistent dimensions throughout, with no apparent connection to natural cave systems. These characteristics go beyond simple modification of natural features and suggest more extensive engineering. Face with raised eyebrow. To properly evaluate the Ozark Tunnel claims, we must examine them in global context. Throughout history and across cultures, humans have excavated underground passages for various purposes, and understanding these comparative examples helps us assess both the plausibility and potential purposes of Ozark tunnels. Globe showing Europe-Africa. Perhaps the most relevant modern comparison comes from the Khu Khai tunnels near Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. This network of hand-dug tunnels, created primarily during the Vietnam War, but with origins dating back to the 1940s, extends for over 150 miles beneath the Vietnamese countryside. The tunnels were excavated entirely with simple hand tools, mostly by farmers and villagers working in secret, and included multiple levels, living chambers, storage areas, hospitals, and command centers. The Khu Khai tunnels demonstrate several crucial points. First, extensive tunnel networks can be created without modern technology, using only determination, organization, and basic tools. Second, such tunnels can remain largely unknown to outsiders, even in relatively populated areas. The tunnels were a complete surprise to American forces despite being beneath areas they controlled. Third, tunnels serving important purposes will be maintained across generations and can involve entire communities in their construction and use. The scale and complexity of Khu Khai were achieved in just a few decades. Imagine what could be accomplished over centuries or millennia if a culture had strong motivations for underground construction. The Vietnamese tunnels prove that reports of extensive hand-excavated passages are not inherently implausible. Hole. Europe contains numerous examples of ancient and medieval tunnel systems that demonstrate sophisticated underground engineering with pre-industrial technology. The catacombs of Rome, Paris, and other European cities represent millions of cubic meters of excavated space, created for burial, quarrying, and later adapted for various uses, including refuge during conflicts. Classical. More relevant to the Ozark question are the Erdstall, mysterious medieval tunnel systems found throughout Bavaria and Austria. These are small, narrow passages excavated through solid rock, often maintaining remarkably straight alignments for dozens or even hundreds of meters. They typically feature smooth walls, level or slightly graded floors, and consistent dimensions, usually just large enough for a person to crawl or crouch through. Germany, over 700 Erdstall have been documented in Bavaria alone, yet their purpose remains debated among archaeologists. They clearly required enormous labor to create using medieval tools, but they show no evidence of mining, contain no valuable deposits, and their layouts don't suggest storage or habitation. Various theories propose ceremonial use, refuge function, or purposes we can no longer understand. The Erdstall demonstrate that ancient peoples did create extensive tunnel systems for reasons that may not be immediately apparent from the physical remains. This Neolithic underground complex, dating to approximately for 1200 BCE represents one of the most impressive examples of prehistoric underground construction. The hypogeum is a three-level structure carved entirely from solid limestone bedrock, with chambers, passages, and architectural features that demonstrate sophisticated planning and execution. Malta, the complex, extends approximately 500 square meters and reaches depths of over 10 meters below the surface. The chambers include carved pillars, decorative elements, and acoustic properties that suggest ceremonial or ritual functions. The labor investment was enormous, estimated at thousands of person-hours, yet it was accomplished with stone and bone tools during the Neolithic period. Hammer. The hypogeum proves that Neolithic peoples, with technological capabilities similar to or less advanced than pre-Columbian North American cultures, could and did create extensive underground complexes for purposes important to their societies. If Mediterranean peoples could excavate the hypogeum 6,000 years ago, there is no technological reason why pre-Columbian Ozark peoples could not have created similar works. The underground cities of Cappadocia represent perhaps the most spectacular examples of ancient underground construction. Derinkuyu, the largest known underground city in the region, extends to depths of approximately 85 meters and could accommodate thousands of people. The complex includes living quarters, storage rooms, stables, churches, wine presses, and ventilation shafts, all carved from the soft volcanic tuff rock of the region. Turkey. While Derinkuyu was primarily excavated during the Byzantine era, archaeological evidence shows that the tunnels were begun much earlier, possibly during the Hittite period around 1400 BCE, and expanded over millennia. The complex demonstrates that underground construction could be an ongoing cultural practice, with successive generations expanding and modifying the works of their predecessors. Amphora. The relevance to the Ozark question is clear. If the Ozark tunnels exist and show evidence of ancient construction, they could represent a similar tradition of underground engineering adapted to local geology and cultural needs. The fact that such traditions existed in other cultures makes their existence in pre-Columbian North America at least plausible. Glowing Star, the Qanat systems of Persia, Central Asia, and North Africa represent a different type of ancient tunnel engineering focused on water management. These are underground channels that tap into groundwater sources in highland areas and transport water over considerable distances to lowland communities. Some qanats extend for dozens of kilometers, all excavated by hand through various types of rock. Droplet. The oldest known qanats date to approximately 3,000 years ago, though the technology may be older. They required sophisticated understanding of geology, hydrology, and surveying to maintain the precise grades needed for water flow. Teams of specialized diggers, called mukanis, developed techniques passed down through generations for excavating and maintaining these systems. Building. While there is no evidence that Ozark tunnels served water management functions, the Qanat systems demonstrate that ancient cultures did create extensive underground infrastructure for practical purposes, and that such construction required specialized knowledge maintained by guilds or societies that jealously guarded their techniques. This provides a possible model for understanding how tunnel engineering knowledge could exist and be transmitted in pre-Columbian Ozark cultures. Wrench. If a serious, well-funded investigation of the Ozark tunnel question were undertaken today, modern technology offers tools that were unavailable to previous generations and could potentially locate and characterize tunnels without extensive excavation. Understanding these technologies helps us appreciate what could be learned and why the lack of their application to this question is particularly frustrating. Satellite antenna ground penetrating radar, or GPR, transmits electromagnetic pulses into the ground and measures the reflections from subsurface interfaces. Voids such as caves or tunnels create distinctive signatures because the air-rock interface produces strong reflections. Modern GPR systems can detect features at depths of 20 meters or more in favorable geological conditions, which would encompass most reported tunnel depths. Bar chart. High-resolution GPR surveys conducted over the areas where tunnels have been historically reported could identify subsurface anomalies warranting further investigation. The technology has advanced dramatically in recent decades, with systems now capable of producing 3D subsurface maps with resolution sufficient to distinguish artificial features from natural voids. World. The limitation is that GPR requires access to the surface above suspected tunnels, which may be on private property or in rugged terrain. It also requires expert interpretation to distinguish tunnels from natural caves, bedding planes, or other geological features. But in the hands of experienced operators working in collaboration with geologists and archaeologists, GPR could potentially locate tunnels if they exist in surveyable areas. Chart increasing light detection and ranging, or LiDAR, uses laser pulses to create extremely detailed topographic maps. When applied from aircraft over forested terrain, LiDAR can penetrate vegetation and reveal subtle surface features invisible to normal observation. This technology has revolutionized archaeology in recent years, revealing previously unknown ancient structures beneath jungle canopy in Central America, Cambodia, and elsewhere. Small. In the Ozark context, LiDAR could potentially identify surface features associated with tunnels. Subtle depressions indicating collapsed passages, vegetation anomalies caused by altered drainage or soil chemistry above tunnels, or artificial features like concealed entrances or ventilation shafts. While LiDAR cannot directly detect underground passages, it can identify surface signatures that might guide ground-based investigation. Evergreen tree high-resolution LiDAR coverage now exists for much of the Ozark region, collected for forestry management and other purposes. This data could be analyzed specifically looking for anomalous features in areas where tunnel reports have been concentrated. Such analysis would be relatively inexpensive compared to field investigation and could help prioritize locations for ground truthing. Desktop. These geophysical techniques measure variations in subsurface magnetic properties or electrical resistance, which can indicate voids, disturbed soil, or other features of archaeological interest. They have been used successfully to locate buried structures, tombs, and other features without excavation. Magnet. In areas where tunnel entrances may have been deliberately filled or where passages have collapsed, magnetometry might detect the disturbed rock or fill material that differs from surrounding bedrock. Electrical resistivity can identify voids or air-filled spaces that have different conductivity than solid rock. Used in combination with GPR and careful surface survey, these techniques could potentially locate tunnels even if entrances are no longer visible. High-voltage active seismic surveys, which generate sound waves and measure how they propagate through rock, can detect voids and discontinuities at greater depths than GPR. Passive seismic monitoring can identify natural cavities by analyzing how ambient seismic noise, like wind and water flow, creates resonances in underground spaces. Water wave. These techniques are more expensive and technically demanding than GPR, but could detect larger tunnels or cave systems at depths beyond the range of other methods. If the Ozark tunnels include extensive deep networks, seismic investigation might be the only way to map them without direct access. Chart decreasing for any passages that can be accessed. Modern cave surveying technology has advanced far beyond the compass and tape methods of previous generations. LiDAR scanners small enough to carry into caves can create millimeter-precise 3D models of passages, capturing details of wall textures, floor features, and overall geometry that can then be analyzed to determine natural versus artificial formation. Camera with flash. High-resolution photography, photogrammetry, and even ground-penetrating radar used from inside passages can characterize features and potentially detect hidden chambers or passages beyond visible endpoints. If even one of the reported Ozark tunnels could be relocated and accessed, modern documentation techniques could provide definitive data about its characteristics and origins. Magnifying glass tilted left. While the historical record provides the foundation for the Ozark Tunnel mystery, reports have continued into recent decades. These modern accounts come from a different context. Witnesses with access to better lighting, photography, and communication, living in an era where cave exploration is a recognized recreational activity. Yet the reports continue to describe puzzling discoveries. Flashlight in 1987, 3 recreational cavers from Springfield, Missouri, were exploring a little-known cave system near Harrison, Arkansas. The group, experienced cavers who had explored dozens of Ozark caves, encountered a passage that struck them as anomalous. According to their account, documented in a letter to the Arkansas Speleological Survey, they found a passage that was notably straight, approximately 6 feet high with smooth vertical walls, extending beyond the range of their lights before apparently turning. Person climbing. What made the experience particularly memorable was that the passage appeared to connect 2 separate cave systems that, based on the local geology and topography, should not have been naturally connected. The cavers reported that the floor of the passage showed evidence of human traffic, a worn path through accumulated sediment, though whether this was recent or ancient, they could not determine. Hiking boot, the group photographed the passage and took compass bearings, intending to return with proper survey equipment. However, when they attempted to relocate the cave several months later, they could not find the entrance. They had not recorded GPS coordinates, GPS was not widely available to civilians in 1987, and their written directions based on landmarks proved insufficient. Multiple subsequent searches over the following years were unsuccessful. The account is frustrating because the witnesses were credible, experienced cavers who understood cave geology and were genuinely puzzled by what they found. They attempted to document the discovery and follow proper reporting procedures. Yet the site could not be relocated, leaving only their testimony and a few photographs that, while showing an unusual passage, cannot definitively prove artificial construction. In 1993, excavation for a new lakefront development at Table Rock Lake in southern Missouri unexpectedly revealed a void space. The construction foreman who examined the opening described it in a local newspaper interview as a tunnel approximately 7 feet high and 5 feet wide, extending into the hillside with smooth walls and a level floor. Building. The discovery halted construction temporarily while the developer consulted with engineers about potential sinkhole risks. A geologist hired to assess the situation examined the opening and concluded in his report that it was likely a natural cave feature that did not pose structural concerns for the development. Construction resumed, and the opening was filled with concrete as part of the foundation work. However, the construction foreman remained convinced that what he had seen was not a natural cave. In interviews conducted years later by local researchers investigating the tunnel mystery, he maintained that the regularity and straightness of the passage were unlike any natural cave he had seen in his decades of construction work in the Ozarks. He expressed regret that he had not photographed the opening or insisted on more thorough investigation before it was filled. Pensive face. The geologist's report, obtained through public records requests, does note that the passage showed unusual regularity and that its formation mechanism was not immediately apparent, though it concluded that natural processes could account for the features observed. The report recommended filling the opening to prevent water infiltration that might cause subsidence, a recommendation the developer followed. Clipboard today, million-dollar homes occupy the site. Beneath one of them, entombed in concrete, may lie evidence that could help solve the Ozark Tunnel mystery. Or it may simply be an unusual natural cave that sparked speculation. We will never know. House with garden. A more recent account comes from a hiker who claimed to have discovered a tunnel entrance while backpacking in the Ozark National Forest in 2006. The individual, who requested anonymity when sharing his story on an internet forum dedicated to Ozark mysteries, described finding an opening concealed behind a rockfall in a remote ravine. Hiking boots. According to his account, he cleared enough rocks to peer inside and could see a passage extending into the hillside, approximately 5 feet square with remarkably smooth walls. He claimed to have entered and explored about 50 feet before retreating due to poor air quality and being alone without proper cave exploration equipment. He reported that the passage maintained consistent dimensions and bearing for the distance he explored. Flashlight. The account includes details about the location, though not precise enough to allow others to relocate the site. The author claimed he intended to return with proper equipment and companions, but suffered a serious hiking injury several months later that prevented further backcountry travel. He posted the account hoping others might investigate, but also expressed concern about publicizing the exact location for fear of vandalism or site destruction. This account is difficult to evaluate. It comes from an anonymous internet posting, lacks photographic documentation, and cannot be verified. It could be entirely fabricated, a misidentification of a natural cave, or a genuine discovery of something significant. The story represents the modern version of the 19th century phenomenon, individuals reporting mysterious tunnel discoveries that cannot be confirmed but also cannot be definitively dismissed. Laptop computer. More credible are reports from organized cave surveying groups that occasionally note passages in otherwise natural cave systems that show anomalous characteristics. These reports appear in speleological society publications and databases maintained by state geological surveys. World. A 2011 survey of a cave system in Stone County, Missouri, documented a passage designated as showing possible human modification. The survey notes describe walls that are smoother than surrounding passages, a floor that appears leveled, and an orientation that crosses structural features at an unusual angle. The surveyors, all experienced cavers, noted these observations but declined to draw conclusions about whether the modifications were ancient or relatively recent. Triangular ruler. Similarly, a 2015 survey in Newton County, Arkansas, documented what surveyors described as tool marks on walls in a section of passage that was otherwise difficult to explain through natural formation processes. Photographs of these marks were submitted to geologists who offered varying interpretations. Some thought they could be natural features like scratches from transporting rocks. Others considered them consistent with deliberate working of the stone. Hammer. These modern survey observations are valuable because they come from trained, experienced cave explorers using modern documentation techniques. They represent the least sensational type of evidence, careful professional observations that note anomalies without making dramatic claims. Yet collectively, they suggest that passages with unusual characteristics do exist in Ozark cave systems, and that the question of human modification deserves serious investigation rather than dismissal. Bar chart. The failure of mainstream archaeology to investigate the Ozark tunnels has created a vacuum filled by amateur researchers, local historians, and enthusiasts who have attempted their own investigations. These efforts, while sincere and sometimes sophisticated, face limitations that illustrate both the possibilities and challenges of citizen science approaches to archaeological mysteries. Microscope. In the 1990s, a group of amateur researchers in northern Arkansas formed the Ozark Tunnel Research Group with the goal of systematically investigating tunnel reports. The group included retired engineers, local historians, experienced cavers, and interested citizens. They compiled historical accounts, interviewed elderly residents who remembered old stories, and attempted to locate sites mentioned in 19th and early 20th century documents. Busts in silhouette, the group's approach was relatively sophisticated for amateur research. They created a database of tunnel reports, mapped them using GIS software, and conducted field investigations of promising locations. They attempted to obtain access to relevant archives and consulted with geologists about cave formation processes. Their work, documented in a self-published newsletter that circulated among members and interested researchers, represents the most sustained amateur investigation of the mystery. However, the group faced persistent obstacles. Most promising sites were on private property where owners denied access or demanded fees the group could not afford. Historical location descriptions were often too vague to allow precise site identification. The group lacked funds for sophisticated geophysical equipment or professional archaeological consultation. And perhaps most significantly, they lacked credibility with institutional science. Their findings, when reported to state archaeological offices or academic departments, were politely received but generated no institutional follow-up. Prohibited. The Ozark Tunnel Research Group disbanded in the early 2000s when key members moved away or lost interest. Their archives, including field notes, photographs, and compiled historical references, were donated to a local historical society where they remain largely unexamined by professional researchers. The group's experience illustrates both the potential and limitations of amateur investigation. Genuine enthusiasm and often impressive effort, but lacking the resources, access, and credibility needed to produce results that institutional science will take seriously. Books. Some amateur investigators have used metal detectors in areas where tunnels have been reported, reasoning that if the tunnels were mining works, they might contain tool fragments or ore deposits that would produce detector signals. This approach has yielded occasional finds of old metal objects, coins, buttons, and tools, but nothing that definitively establishes connection to ancient tunnels. Magnifying glass tilted left. The challenge is that the Ozarks have been inhabited and used by Europeans and Americans for 2 centuries, leaving countless artifacts scattered across the landscape. Finding a 19th century tool in a ravine where a tunnel was supposedly discovered proves only that 19th century people were in that ravine, not that they encountered an ancient tunnel there. Without stratigraphic context and professional archaeological analysis, such finds are archaeological noise rather than signal. The internet age has enabled new forms of amateur investigation through online forums, social media groups, and crowdsourced databases where people share tunnel reports, historical references, and investigation attempts. These communities include genuine researchers sharing information, enthusiasts swapping stories, and inevitably, hoaxers and sensationalists muddying the waters. Laptop computer. The advantage of these online communities is that they aggregate information from diverse sources and preserve accounts that might otherwise be lost. The disadvantage is the difficulty of assessing credibility and separating genuine reports from fabrication, misidentification, or wishful thinking. A dramatic tunnel claim posted to social media may be shared thousands of times regardless of its veracity, creating the appearance of evidence while actually obscuring genuine investigation. Mobile phone. Some online efforts have been more systematic. A website created in the 2010s attempts to compile all historical and contemporary tunnel reports in a searchable database with source citations and location information where available. This resource has value for any future professional investigation, aggregating scattered references that would otherwise require extensive archival work to locate. But without professional verification, the database mixes credible historical accounts with questionable contemporary claims and outright fabrications. Beyond the question of whether the tunnels exist and what they might represent archaeologically, the persistence of the mystery itself is a cultural phenomenon worthy of examination. Why have these stories endured for nearly 2 centuries? What needs do they serve for the communities that preserve them? And what does the mystery tell us about relationships between local knowledge and institutional science? For many Ozark communities, the tunnel stories are part of regional identity and local pride. They represent the idea that the familiar landscape holds secrets, that beneath the known surface lies hidden history waiting to be discovered. In regions that often feel overlooked by mainstream American culture, the possibility of harboring one of the continent's great archaeological mysteries provides a sense of importance and distinctiveness. National. Local historians and amateur researchers who investigate the tunnels are often motivated by genuine love for their region and desire to understand its deep history. They feel that mainstream archaeology has ignored the Ozarks, focused its attention on more dramatic sites elsewhere, while dismissing local traditions and accounts. The tunnel mystery becomes a vehicle for asserting that the Ozarks matter, that significant history happened here even if institutional science has not recognized it. Read, this dynamic creates tension between local knowledge and academic expertise. When university archaeologists dismiss tunnel reports as folklore or misidentification, local researchers often respond that academics don't know the land, don't listen to people who have lived here for generations, and are prejudiced against evidence that doesn't fit their established theories. There is truth in both perspectives. Academics have legitimate methodological reasons for skepticism, but they also sometimes display bias against non-academic sources and miss genuine phenomena because they fall outside expected patterns. Balance, the tunnel mystery has economic dimensions. Cave tourism is a significant industry in the Ozarks, with numerous show caves attracting visitors who pay admission to tour underground wonders. The possibility of discovering spectacular ancient tunnels has obvious commercial potential, and some investigations have been motivated partly by hope of developing a new tourist attraction. Money back. This economic interest can both help and hinder serious investigation. It provides motivation and sometimes funding for site exploration, but it also creates incentives for exaggeration or fabrication, with the potential for hoaxes designed to generate publicity or attract investors. The tourism angle has led some academics to dismiss the entire tunnel question as commercial promotion rather than genuine mystery, a dismissal that may be unfair, but is understandable given that some tunnel claims have indeed been commercial stunts. Circus tent. The tunnel mystery also connects to broader American fascinations with lost civilizations and ancient mysteries. The idea that sophisticated cultures existed in North America before Columbus, that they built monuments and engineered works that survive beneath our feet, has powerful appeal. It challenges Eurocentric narratives, honors indigenous achievement, and suggests that official history is incomplete. Classical, unfortunately, this appeal has attracted fringe theorists who incorporate the Ozark tunnels into elaborate pseudo-archaeological narratives involving lost continents, ancient aliens, or prehistoric advanced civilizations. These narratives, while entertaining, are historically and archaeologically baseless and have the negative effect of tainting legitimate investigation by association. When serious researchers mention the Ozark tunnels, they risk being lumped together with ancient aliens enthusiasts and Atlantis believers. Alien. This guilt by association has made some professional archaeologists even more reluctant to engage with the tunnel question. They fear that investigating claims associated with fringe theories will damage their professional reputations, even if the investigation is conducted with proper skeptical rigor. The result is that legitimate questions remain unexamined to avoid any appearance of endorsing illegitimate speculation. Person gesturing no if a well-designed, adequately funded, professionally conducted investigation of the Ozark tunnel question were undertaken, what might we learn? The potential discoveries extend beyond simply confirming or debunking the existence of artificial tunnels to illuminating multiple aspects of Ozark prehistory and geology. Light bulb, in the best case for tunnel advocates, investigation would confirm the existence of extensive artificial or significantly modified passages showing clear evidence of pre-Columbian construction. Such a discovery would require multiple lines of evidence, passages with characteristics difficult to explain through natural processes, tool marks or techniques consistent with pre-Columbian technology, datable materials establishing ancient construction or use, and contexts suggesting cultural purposes. Party popper. This discovery would necessitate major revision of understanding of pre-Columbian Ozark cultures. It would demonstrate engineering capabilities not previously documented in the region. It would raise immediate questions about purpose. Why did these cultures invest enormous labor in underground construction? The answers, derived from careful archaeological analysis, could illuminate aspects of pre-Columbian life, cosmology, economy, and social organization that are currently invisible in the surface archaeological record. Trophy, the discovery would also validate local traditions and amateur researchers who have insisted for generations that something significant lies beneath the Ozarks. It would provide a powerful example of how mainstream archaeology can miss important phenomena when it dismisses evidence that doesn't fit established models. And it would create new tourist attractions and educational opportunities that could benefit Ozark communities economically while raising public awareness of indigenous achievement. Glowing star. A more modest but still significant outcome would be confirmation that some reported tunnels are natural caves that show clear evidence of modification or intensive use by pre-Columbian peoples. Such a finding would not require revising basic understanding of pre-Columbian capabilities. Modifying existing caves is less dramatic than creating entirely artificial tunnels, but it would still add important knowledge. Hammer. Evidence might include walls smoothed or straightened, floors leveled, constrictions enlarged to allow easier passage, perhaps even connections excavated between nearby natural passages to create more useful networks. Dating this modification and establishing its cultural context would illuminate how pre-Columbian Ozark peoples understood and utilized underground spaces, a dimension of their adaptation to the landscape that is currently poorly understood. Bricks. This scenario would explain why witnesses describe passages with both natural and artificial characteristics, and why geologists sometimes find the passages puzzling but not inexplicable. It would vindicate the basic observation that something unusual exists, while providing a more conservative interpretation than completely artificial tunnel networks. Direct hit. It is also possible that systematic investigation would determine that the reported tunnels are entirely natural caves that happen to have unusual characteristics, straight passages, formed by particular geological structures, smooth walls, produced by specific erosion processes, or features that seem artificial to casual observers but are explicable to experts who understand local geology in detail. Even this outcome would be valuable. It would definitively answer the question, allowing us to close the book on the mystery and redirect attention to confirmed aspects of Ozark prehistory. It would provide detailed documentation of interesting Ozark caves that may have value for speleological research or as natural heritage sites, and it would create teaching opportunities about how natural processes can create features that appear designed, helping public understanding of geology and critical evaluation of archaeological claims. Open book. The most frustrating but possible outcome is that investigation, despite best efforts, simply cannot locate any of the reported tunnels. Entrances may have collapsed, been deliberately filled, or become obscured beyond recovery. Historical location descriptions may be too imprecise, or the reports may have always been misidentifications, exaggerations, or fabrications. Person shrugging this outcome would not definitively prove that tunnels never existed. It is impossible to prove a negative, especially about underground features in vast, rugged terrain. But it would shift the burden of proof back to tunnel advocates to provide better evidence before further institutional resources are devoted to investigation. It would be disappointing, but would at least represent good faith effort to address the question with appropriate scientific rigor. Pensive face. Any discussion of investigating the Ozark tunnels must begin with fundamental ethical questions about who has the right to investigate, whose knowledge matters, and who benefits from discoveries. These questions are particularly acute when dealing with sites that may be culturally significant to indigenous communities who have been systematically excluded from decisions about their own heritage. Handshake. The Ozark region was homeland and hunting territory for multiple indigenous nations, including the Osage, Quapaw, Caddo, and later, the Cherokee, who were forcibly relocated to adjacent Indian territory. These communities maintain cultural and spiritual connections to the Ozarks despite forced removal, ongoing marginalization, and the loss of much traditional knowledge through deliberate cultural suppression. If the reported tunnels exist and were created or used by pre-Columbian peoples, they constitute indigenous cultural heritage. Under ethical frameworks developed in recent decades, partly in response to shameful histories of looting indigenous grave and sacred sites, indigenous communities have authority over their cultural heritage that supersedes the curiosity of researchers or the property rights of current landowners. Classical. This means that investigation of the tunnels, if undertaken, must be conducted in genuine partnership with relevant indigenous nations, not merely consulting them as an afterthought, but involving them as co-directors of research from the earliest planning stages. Indigenous representatives must have real authority to shape research questions, methodologies, and decisions about what information is made public and what remains protected. Palms up together in practice, this is complex. Contemporary indigenous nations may have varying levels of traditional knowledge about specific sites, varying views about whether investigation is appropriate, and potentially competing claims to authority over sites in regions where multiple nations have historical connections. The Cherokee Nation, the Osage Nation, the Quapaw Nation, and other indigenous governments are sovereign entities with their own priorities, governance structures, and policies regarding cultural heritage. Black flag. Any researcher proposing to investigate the tunnels would need to engage in extensive consultation, likely requiring formal agreements with multiple indigenous nations, establishing protocols for site access, artifact handling, information sharing, and publication. This process takes time, requires relationship building based on mutual respect, and must accept that indigenous nations may decide that certain sites should not be investigated or that certain information should not be shared with outsiders. Some archaeologists, accustomed to academic freedom to pursue research wherever evidence leads, find these restrictions frustrating, but they are ethically necessary. Indigenous peoples have seen their ancestors' grave robbed, their sacred objects displayed in museums, their cultural knowledge published without permission, and their sites destroyed by researchers who took what they wanted and gave nothing back. Trust must be earned through demonstrated respect and genuine partnership. A separate but related ethical issue concerns the rights of current property owners. Most of the areas where tunnels have been reported are on private land, and under American property law, landowners generally have rights to archaeological resources on their property, subject to certain federal and state protections for significant sites. House with garden. If tunnels are located on private property, investigation requires landowner permission. Landowners may refuse access, may demand compensation, or may want to control or commercialize any discoveries. These are legitimate rights, even if they frustrate researchers, and must be respected through proper negotiation and compensation. Money bag. There is inherent tension between indigenous cultural authority and private property rights. A landowner may legally own land containing indigenous cultural sites, but that legal ownership does not confer moral authority to damage those sites or to exclude indigenous communities from accessing their heritage. Navigating these tensions requires careful negotiation, creative agreements, and sometimes legal interventions when sites of exceptional significance are threatened. Balance, another ethical dimension, concerns what information should be made public if tunnels are discovered and investigated. Academic tradition favors open publication, the idea that knowledge should be freely shared for the benefit of all. But this tradition has often conflicted with indigenous interests in protecting sacred knowledge and preventing looting of sensitive sites. Books. If investigation reveals culturally sensitive information, ceremonial spaces, burial sites, or locations of sacred significance, indigenous communities may legitimately request that specific details not be published. This might include exact locations, descriptions of sacred objects or imagery, or information about ceremonial practices associated with the sites. Researchers must be prepared to accept these limitations even if they reduce the academic impact of their work. There is also a practical concern about publicity attracting vandals, looters, or irresponsible explorers who might damage sites. The history of archaeology includes numerous examples where publication of exciting discoveries led to site destruction by treasure hunters or thrill seekers. Sometimes the best protection for a site is that its location remains known only to a small circle of responsible parties. Prohibited. The Ozark Tunnel mystery, regardless of whether tunnels exist, reveals important insights about how institutional science works, what questions it pursues, and what evidence it takes seriously. These insights are valuable for understanding not just this specific mystery, but the broader relationship between academic knowledge and other ways of knowing. Graduation capped scientific disciplines develop comprehensive models based on accumulated evidence and successful theories. These models are valuable. They organize knowledge, guide research, and allow prediction. But they also create cognitive barriers to recognizing phenomena that don't fit established patterns. North American archaeology has developed detailed models of pre-Columbian cultures in the eastern woodlands based on decades of research at thousands of sites. These models are sophisticated and evidence-based, but within these models, there is no expectation of extensive tunnel engineering in the Ozarks. When confronted with reports that don't fit the model, the default assumption is that the reports are mistaken rather than that the model is incomplete. This conservatism is not inherently wrong. Most anomalous claims do turn out to be mistakes, misidentifications, or hoaxes. Science should demand strong evidence before accepting claims that require revising established understanding. The problem arises when conservatism becomes rigidity, when no amount of evidence is considered sufficient because the claim is outside the accepted framework. Stop sign. The Ozark Tunnel question may represent a case where genuine phenomena have been dismissed because they don't fit archaeological expectations. Or it may represent appropriate scientific skepticism about claims that lack definitive physical evidence. Without investigation, we cannot know which interpretation is correct, but the very lack of investigation after nearly 2 centuries of reports suggests that conservatism may have tipped into rigidity. Warning: academic disciplines develop hierarchies of evidence, ranking different types of sources by reliability and value. In archaeology, physical artifacts in stratified deposits rank high, radiocarbon dates rank high, careful stratigraphic analysis ranks high. Oral traditions, historical accounts, and witness testimony rank much lower, considered interesting but unreliable. This hierarchy makes sense in many contexts. Physical evidence is less subject to bias and error than human memory and testimony. But the hierarchy can also create blindness to valid knowledge encoded in non-material sources. Oral traditions have repeatedly proven to preserve accurate information over centuries or millennia. Historical accounts, while requiring critical analysis, often contain valuable data. Witness testimony, though fallible, sometimes describes real phenomena. The tunnel reports include oral traditions from indigenous communities, historical accounts from trained surveyors and miners, and contemporary witness testimony from experienced cavers and geologists. By the strict evidential hierarchy of academic archaeology, all of these sources are low quality and insufficient to justify major research investment. But collectively, the consistency and independence of the reports suggest they may preserve genuine information about real phenomena. Clipboard. A more flexible approach would take seriously the possibility that lower-ranked evidence might point toward important discoveries, that it deserves at least preliminary investigation rather than dismissal. The cost of a preliminary investigation using modern remote sensing technologies is modest compared to typical archaeological project budgets. The potential payoff, if the reports prove accurate, is enormous. Yet the evidential hierarchy makes such investigation unlikely without first obtaining the high-quality evidence that only investigation can provide. Counterclockwise arrows button, the tunnel question falls between established disciplinary boundaries. It requires expertise in archaeology, geology, speleology, indigenous studies, and history. No single discipline claims ownership, and interdisciplinary research, while celebrated in principle, is difficult to organize and fund in practice. Jigsaw archaeologists consider it primarily a geological question: is it natural caves or artificial tunnels? Geologists consider it primarily an archaeological question: what is the cultural context and significance? Historians defer to archaeologists for questions about physical sites. The result is that everyone assumes someone else should investigate, and no one does. Person shrugging this dynamic is common in academic research. Questions that don't fit neatly into established disciplines, that require expertise across multiple fields, struggle to attract attention and resources. The orphaned questions remain unexamined not because they lack importance, but because they lack an institutional home. Houses. Solving this problem requires creating interdisciplinary teams and funding structures that support research crossing traditional boundaries. Some universities and funding agencies have tried to encourage such work, but the incentive structures of academia, which reward disciplinary specialization and publication in field-specific journals, work against genuine interdisciplinarity. Direct hit. The Ozark Tunnel mystery has been kept alive primarily by amateur researchers, local historians, recreational cavers, interested citizens who investigate in their spare time without academic credentials or institutional support. Academic archaeology has a complex relationship with such amateur work. Magnifying glass tilted left. On one hand, amateurs often lack training in proper archaeological methodology, may damage sites through improper excavation or collection, and sometimes promote interpretations not supported by evidence. On the other hand, amateurs bring local knowledge, passion, and persistence that professionals may lack. They notice things professionals miss, preserve traditions that might otherwise be lost, and sometimes make genuine discoveries. The ideal relationship would be collaborative, professionals providing methodological guidance and analytical expertise, amateurs providing local knowledge and investigative labor. Such collaborations have proven successful in various fields, from astronomy to natural history. But archaeology has been slower than some disciplines to embrace citizen science, partly due to legitimate concerns about site protection and partly due to professional gatekeeping. Construction. The tunnel mystery illustrates both the value and limitations of amateur research. Amateurs have compiled historical references, interviewed witnesses, located possible sites, and kept the question alive. But they lack resources for definitive investigation and lack credibility with institutional science. A collaborative model could combine amateur knowledge with professional methodology, but building such collaboration requires professionals willing to take amateur contributions seriously. Handshake. Despite all the barriers we have discussed, it is possible to imagine a realistic path towards serious investigation of the Ozark Tunnel question. Such an investigation would require resources, partnerships, and institutional will, but nothing beyond what has been assembled for other archaeological projects. Here is what a comprehensive, professional investigation might look like. The first phase would involve no fieldwork, but would compile and analyze all existing information about the tunnels. This would include systematic archival research to locate every historical reference to tunnels in 19th and 20th century documents, county histories, surveyors' notes, mining company records, newspaper accounts, and personal memoirs. Books. Simultaneously, oral history work would be conducted with Ozark communities, particularly elderly residents whose families have been in the region for generations, to document any traditional knowledge or family stories about tunnels. This must be done respectfully and with understanding that some knowledge may be considered too sensitive to share with outsiders. Microphone. Most crucially, consultation would be initiated with relevant indigenous nations, the Osage Nation, Cherokee Nation, Quapaw Nation, and potentially others, to seek permission for investigation and to learn whether indigenous communities possess traditional knowledge about underground sites in the Ozarks. This consultation must be genuine partnership from the beginning, not token inclusion after research is already designed. Phase 1 would culminate in a comprehensive database of all tunnel reports, mapped using GIS to identify spatial patterns, analyzed to distinguish credible accounts from likely fabrications or misidentifications, and synthesized into a research design for field investigation. This phase might take 1 to 2 years and could be conducted with modest funding, perhaps $50,000 to $100,000. World. Based on Phase 1 results, Phase 2 would use remote sensing technologies to survey areas where multiple independent reports have located tunnels. and where geological conditions make their existence plausible. This would include high-resolution LiDAR analysis of existing aerial survey data, ground-penetrating radar surveys in accessible areas, and possibly electrical resistivity or magnetometry in locations where other techniques prove inconclusive. Satellite antenna. This phase requires specialized equipment and expert operators, but is increasingly affordable as the technologies become more common. A comprehensive remote sensing survey of a dozen priority locations could be conducted for $100,000 to $200,000, a modest budget by archaeological standards. Money bag. Phase 2 would identify specific subsurface anomalies warranting ground investigation. Voids that might be tunnels, disturbed areas that might be filled entrances, or other features suggesting underground passages. Even if no artificial tunnels are found, the survey would document natural cave systems and contribute to speleological knowledge of the Ozarks. Microscope based on Phase 2 findings. Phase 3 would involve carefully controlled, limited physical investigation of the most promising anomalies. This might include small-scale test excavations to access potentially filled entrances, cave diving or technical climbing to reach passages suggested by remote sensing, and detailed documentation using 3D scanning and other technologies of any accessible passages. Flashlight. Phase 3 would be conducted with full archaeological methodology, stratigraphic excavation, comprehensive artifact collection, detailed mapping and photography, analysis of sediments and materials, and if possible, dating of any human modification or use. Indigenous monitors and representatives would be present for all fieldwork, and all activities would be conducted with permits from relevant state agencies and permissions from landowners. Pick. This is the most expensive and time-consuming phase, potentially requiring several field seasons and costing $300,000 to $500,000, depending on how many sites are investigated and what is found. But if artificial or significantly modified tunnels are confirmed, the investment would be justified by the significance of the discovery. Gemstone. Following field investigation, Phase 4 would involve laboratory analysis of any materials recovered, preparation of detailed site reports and scientific publications, and development of management plans for any confirmed sites to ensure their protection and appropriate use. Microscope. Publication would follow protocols agreed upon with indigenous partners, protecting sensitive information while sharing scientifically significant findings with scholarly and public audiences. If no artificial tunnels are found, publication would document what was investigated, explain why the reports appear to be misidentifications or lost natural caves, and provide comprehensive analysis of Ozark cave systems and geology. Open book. Beyond the archaeological and geological questions, the tunnel mystery is lived experience for people in Ozark communities. To understand its full significance, we need to hear from those who have encountered the mystery personally or who have lived their lives in its shadow. Studio. James Wilson, a guide at a commercial show cave in southern Missouri for over 30 years, describes the awkward position he occupies between scientific skepticism and local tradition. Multiple times each season, tourists ask him about the mysterious ancient tunnels they have heard about. He tells them that no one has definitively proven such tunnels exist, that most claims are probably natural caves, and that responsible archaeology requires evidence. But Wilson also knows that his grandfather, who grew up in the Ozarks and spent his life hunting and exploring the hills, swore he had found a passage that seemed worked by human hands. His grandfather was not prone to exaggeration and knew natural caves intimately. Wilson respects his grandfather's memory and judgment, but also respects scientific caution. He navigates this tension by saying we do not know for certain, that the question deserves investigation, but that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Wilson wishes that professional archaeologists would investigate seriously, not to validate every wild claim, but to bring scientific methodology to a question that has persisted too long without resolution. He thinks amateur researchers have kept the question alive, but lack the credibility and resources for definitive answers. He would welcome an investigation conducted with proper rigor that either confirmed significant tunnels or explained definitively why the reports are mistaken. Magnifying glass tilted left Margaret Crowley, in her 80s, grew up hearing stories from her great-grandmother, who was born in the Ozarks in the 1850s. The great-grandmother spoke of passages under the hills that the old people knew about, passages that went deep and far. As a child, Margaret was told these stories at bedtime and accepted them as truth the way children accept what beloved elders tell them. Old woman. As an adult, Margaret questioned whether the stories were literal truth, metaphor, or garbled tradition. She has never seen a tunnel herself, and when she asked other family members about the stories, she got varying responses. Some confirmed hearing similar stories, others dismissed them as tall tales, still others said they had been told not to speak of such things to outsiders. Shushing face, Margaret does not know what to believe. She honors her great-grandmother's memory and thinks the old woman was describing something she considered real. But Margaret also knows that memory is fallible and stories change in retelling. She would like to know the truth, but also recognizes that some mysteries may never be solved. She thinks the uncertainty itself has value, keeping alive a sense that the familiar world holds secrets and that not everything is known or explained. Sparkle's Dr. Sarah Chen teaches archaeology at a regional university and has worked on Ozark prehistoric sites for 20 years. She is frequently asked about the tunnel mystery and finds the question frustrating because it diverts attention from the genuinely important archaeology she and colleagues are conducting, documenting early agricultural systems, analyzing changing settlement patterns, understanding pre-Columbian trade networks. Graduation Cap Chen is skeptical about the tunnel claims. She has examined some of the reports and thinks most are misidentified natural caves or second-hand accounts that have been embellished over time. She points out that in all her fieldwork and consultation with experienced Ozark archaeologists, she has never seen definitive physical evidence of artificial tunnels, no unambiguous tool marks, no artifacts in tunnel contexts, no datable materials establishing ancient construction. Microscope. But Chen also acknowledges that absence of evidence in mainstream archaeological work does not prove the tunnels do not exist. She has never specifically looked for tunnels, and neither has anyone else in professional archaeology. She thinks a properly designed investigation could settle the question and might even discover something significant. She would support such an investigation if it were proposed with rigorous methodology and appropriate partnerships with indigenous communities. Books. What frustrates Chen is that the tunnel mystery gets public attention and local enthusiasm, while the confirmed archaeological sites she works on struggle for funding and recognition. She thinks this reflects a cultural preference for mysteries and lost civilizations over the harder work of piecing together actual history from fragmentary evidence. She wishes people were as excited about real Ozark prehistory as they are about speculative tunnels, face with steam from nose. Living in an age where information is instantly accessible and mysteries are constantly solved through technology and investigation, why does the Ozark Tunnel enigma persist? And what, if anything, is lost if the mystery is definitively solved or debunked? These questions lead us into philosophical reflection on the role of the unknown in human culture. Milky Way humans are drawn to mysteries, to unsolved questions and unexplained phenomena. This attraction serves evolutionary purposes. Curiosity drives exploration and learning. The desire to understand motivates investigation, and the recognition of patterns helps us navigate complex environments. But the attraction to mystery also serves psychological and cultural functions beyond immediate survival. Right. Mysteries provide a sense that the world is larger and more complex than our current understanding, that not everything has been mapped and categorized, that discoveries remain to be made. In a world that often feels completely explained and controlled, mysteries offer the possibility of wonder, the experience of encountering something that exceeds our comprehension. Dizzy, the Ozark tunnels, whether real or imagined, serve this function for many people. They represent the possibility that beneath the familiar landscape, beneath the world we think we know completely, lie secrets and wonders. This possibility makes the ordinary world more interesting, more charged with potential. A hike through Ozark woods becomes not just exercise, but potential discovery. A limestone bluff becomes not just geology, but possible doorway to the unknown. National if the mystery is definitively solved, whether through confirmation of spectacular tunnels or through conclusive demonstration that the reports were always mistakes, something is lost. The solved mystery becomes either confirmed site to be managed and visited according to regulations, or discarded question no longer worth contemplating. Either way, the imaginative space the mystery occupied closes. Sparkles, this is not to argue against investigation or resolution. Mystery for its own sake is not valuable enough to prevent pursuit of knowledge, but it is worth acknowledging that mysteries serve purposes beyond their literal content, that they provide cultural and psychological benefits that disappear when questions are answered. Direct hit. For Ozark communities, the tunnel mystery is not just an abstract puzzle, but part of local identity and connection to place. The stories of tunnel discoveries, the family traditions about passages beneath the hills, and the ongoing debates about what exists beneath the familiar landscape all contribute to a sense that this place is special, that it holds significance beyond its role as scenery or economic resource. House with garden. Place-based knowledge, the detailed understanding of local environment accumulated over generations, is threatened by modern mobility and the homogenization of landscape through development. When people move frequently, when communities lose continuity across generations, when local particularities are erased by chain stores and standardized development, the knowledge of what makes each place unique is lost. Read the tunnel mystery, whatever its factual basis, keeps alive a form of place-based knowledge. It represents attention to landscape, awareness of what previous generations experienced and reported, and commitment to understanding local history in detail. The amateur researchers who investigate the mystery, the longtime residents who preserve family stories, and the local historians who compile accounts all participate in maintaining connection between people and place. Deciduous tree. In a sense, whether the tunnels exist physically is less important than the fact that people care enough about the Ozarks to wonder what lies beneath them, to preserve stories across generations, to investigate and debate. This caring relationship with landscape is valuable regardless of what specific discoveries it produces. Finally, the Ozark Tunnel mystery reminds us that knowledge is never complete, that every answer generates new questions, and that some things may remain genuinely unknown despite our best investigative efforts. The modern world, with its powerful technologies and vast information systems, creates illusions of comprehensive knowledge. We can map Earth from satellites, explore distant planets, sequence genomes, and model climate. Surely we can determine whether tunnels exist in the Ozarks. But the persistence of the mystery, despite 2 centuries of investigation, suggests that some questions resist easy resolution. The tunnels, if they exist, are hidden in vast, rugged terrain, with entrances that may have collapsed or been concealed in regions that have never been systematically surveyed with modern technology. The historical accounts are fragmentary and often imprecise. The traditional knowledge has been disrupted by forced removal and cultural suppression. The geological complexity makes distinguishing natural from artificial features difficult. Person shrugging, we may never know with certainty what lies beneath the Ozarks. Even a comprehensive investigation, if it fails to find tunnels, would not prove they never existed, only that they could not be located with available methods in accessible areas. And if tunnels are found, new mysteries would immediately arise. Who built them? When? For what purposes? How extensive are they really? ? This irreducible uncertainty, far from being a failure, is a realistic acknowledgement of the limits of knowledge and the persistence of mystery in a world that is far more complex than any model we build to comprehend it. Living with uncertainty, with unsolved mysteries, is part of the human condition. The Ozark tunnels, whether ultimately confirmed or debunked or left forever uncertain, teach us to accept that not all questions have answers, that wonder is possible even in familiar places, and that the search for truth sometimes matters more than the finding. Glowing star. We have journeyed deep into the Ozark Enigma, exploring nearly 2 centuries of reports, examining geological and archaeological contexts, considering comparative examples from around the world, and reflecting on what the mystery means for Ozark communities and for our understanding of history and science. What conclusions can we draw from this exploration? Clapperboard, the most honest answer is that the question remains open. The evidence for ancient artificial tunnels beneath the Ozarks is suggestive, but not conclusive. Consistent reports from independent witnesses, patterns that suggest real phenomena rather than random fabrication, geological contexts that make tunnels at least plausible, and comparative examples proving that pre-Columbian peoples elsewhere engaged in sophisticated underground engineering. But we lack the definitive physical evidence that would convince skeptics. No accessible, well-documented tunnels that have been thoroughly studied by professional archaeologists and geologists, no unambiguous tool marks or artifacts establishing human construction, no radiocarbon dates or stratigraphic contexts proving ancient origin. Bar chart. The failure to obtain such evidence does not prove the tunnels do not exist. It may simply reflect that no one with appropriate resources and expertise has seriously looked for them. The institutional barriers we have examined, disciplinary conservatism, evidential hierarchies, lack of funding for speculative research, absence of professional champions, create conditions where genuine mysteries can persist unexamined for generations. Construction, if I were to advocate for a position, it would be this: the Ozark Tunnel question deserves serious investigation. Not because we should believe every local legend or historical anecdote, but because the accumulated evidence, while not definitive, is sufficient to justify preliminary inquiry using modern technologies. The cost of such inquiry is modest compared to typical archaeological budgets. The potential discoveries are significant, and resolution of the question, whatever form that resolution takes, would be valuable. Such an investigation should be conducted with appropriate partnerships with indigenous communities, with respect for their authority over cultural heritage and sacred knowledge. It should employ rigorous archaeological and geological methodology, distinguishing carefully between natural and artificial features. It should be open to the possibility that the tunnels exist while maintaining scientific skepticism that demands strong evidence. And it should be prepared to accept various outcomes: spectacular confirmation of artificial tunnels, evidence of modified natural caves, or conclusion that the reports were always misidentifications or lost natural features. Handshake beyond the specific question of the tunnels, this enigma teaches us important lessons about how knowledge is created and validated, about the relationships between local and institutional knowledge, between amateur and professional investigation, between indigenous and academic ways of knowing. It reminds us that mainstream science, for all its power and value, can develop blind spots, dismissing evidence that does not fit established models or that comes from sources considered unreliable. Graduation cap. The Ozark Tunnel mystery also reminds us that mystery itself has value, that unsolved questions keep alive wonder and curiosity, that the possibility of discovery makes familiar landscapes more meaningful. Whether or not physical tunnels exist beneath the Ozarks, the idea that they might exist enriches the relationship between Ozark communities and their landscape, creating a sense that this place holds secrets worth exploring and preserving. Dizzy. As we conclude this exploration, I invite you to consider what the Ozark Enigma means to you. Does it inspire you to look more carefully at your own familiar landscapes, wondering what histories and secrets they might hold? Does it frustrate you that such questions can remain unresolved for so long? Does it make you think differently about the capabilities of pre-Columbian peoples and the sophistication of indigenous cultures? The Ozark Mountains will continue to stand as they have for hundreds of millions of years, their forests growing thick, their springs flowing clear, their limestone bluffs rising stark and beautiful above the valleys. Beneath that familiar surface, there may lie passages carved by ancient hands, engineering works that would rewrite our understanding of pre-Columbian North America. Or there may be only natural caves, beautiful and complex in their own right, but formed by geological processes rather than human intention. Snow. We do not know which is true, and perhaps we never will. But in a world that increasingly feels mapped and categorized and completely known, there is something valuable in the persistence of mystery, in the recognition that beneath the familiar surface might lie the unknown, waiting for the proper combination of curiosity, respect, technology, and will to reveal itself. Milky Way. The Ozark Enigma endures not because it has been forgotten, but because it has been remembered, preserved in local traditions, investigated by passionate amateurs, and discussed by people who care about this landscape and its deep history. That caring itself is significant, regardless of what physical discoveries it might ultimately produce. Red. So the next time you visit the Ozarks, whether hiking through the forests of the Boston Mountains, floating down the Buffalo River, or exploring one of the region's many show caves, take a moment to consider what might lie beneath your feet. Ancient passages carved for purposes we can only imagine, natural wonders formed over millions of years, or simply solid rock, unremarkable except for the questions people have asked about it. Hiking boot the truth, whatever it is, lies waiting in the darkness beneath the hills. And until someone finally brings appropriate resources, methods, partnerships, and will to the investigation, the mystery will continue to call to those who hear it. Beneath the familiar surface, something unknown waits. The Ozark Enigma persists, patient as the mountains themselves, waiting for its secrets to be revealed or its mysteries to be explained. Sparkles. Perhaps one day, through collaboration between indigenous communities who hold traditional knowledge, professional archaeologists and geologists who bring scientific expertise, amateur researchers who contribute local knowledge and passion, and institutions willing to support rigorous investigation of unconventional questions, we will finally know what lies beneath the Ozarks. Until that day, we live with uncertainty, with wonder, and with the recognition that even in the 21st century, even in familiar landscapes, mysteries endure. Glowing star, the Ozark Mountains keep their secrets. Whether those secrets include ancient engineered tunnels or only the persistent human need to believe that more exists than meets the eye, the mystery itself has become part of the landscape, as much a feature of the Ozarks as the limestone bluffs and clear springs. And that mystery, that persistent question across generations, that refusal to accept that everything is known and settled, may be the most valuable discovery of all. National, thank you for joining me on this journey into the Ozark Enigma. The investigation continues, conducted by passionate individuals who refuse to let the question die, who preserve the stories and search for answers, who maintain hope that one day the tunnels will reveal themselves and the mystery will be solved. Until then, we wonder, we investigate, we question, and we preserve the possibility that beneath the familiar world, the extraordinary waits to be discovered. Party Popper, if this exploration of the Ozark Tunnel mystery has captured your imagination, if it has made you think differently about local legends and historical accounts, if it has inspired you to look more carefully at your own landscape and its hidden histories, please share this video with others who might be interested. Like this video if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of America's most persistent archaeological mysteries, and subscribe to the channel for more investigations into overlooked, forgotten, and unexplained aspects of history. The mysteries persist, the questions endure. And somewhere beneath the ancient hills of the Ozarks, the truth waits in darkness, patient and silent, for the light of discovery or the acceptance of permanent uncertainty. Thank you for watching, and keep questioning what lies beneath the familiar surface of the world around you. Globe showing Europe, Africa.